I had completely forgotten about once touting classics to school children dressed as a Roman legionary, and I feel somewhat underdressed this afternoon. Yeah, it's a fine thing when you've got a great crested helmet and a corselet to lecture in. I wanted to start with a clarification of the publicity which I provided for this lecture, because I think it makes a slightly misleading statement, and I will remind you of it verbatim, which I have it here, that this lecture promises to explore the ingenious ways in which vessels from the Indigenous Americas and ancient Greece convey stories that are as fabulous, complex, emotive, and satisfying as a Hollywood blockbuster. Now, with all due respect to the curators of the exhibition in the Carlos Museum presently, I don't mean that the experience of visiting the current show is going to give you an emotional catharsis or a purging in the way that is comparable to cinema, or at least good cinema. What I mean is that the stories relayed by these vessels are stories whose structure is elementally similar to the stories relayed by most successful movies. Now, that is actually not a very controversial claim to make. And it's a claim that underpins a construction that is nearing completion, I'm told, but I was told that last year and the year before, in downtown LA. Does anyone recognize what it is? The Lucas Museum. To give it its full title, the Lucas Museum of Narrative Art. Now, I had the very pleasant surprise of being summoned by George Lucas while he was still incubating the idea of a museum. As you may be aware, it could have been in several cities and it's ended up in LA. And yes, it was a pleasant surprise, not least because we humble academics are not used to being fetched by helicopter and dropped down in an Italian mansion. The second time this happened, as I was entering, someone unbelievably, for me, in my ambit, was just leaving. I was rather sorry that she was leaving because for many people, she's probably the most important person in the world you could possibly want to meet. Giovanni, do you know who I'm referring to? No, well, you're not from these parts, but it's Beyonce. She was making her exit, and sadly, we never got to have lunch together, but I did get to talk with Mr. Lucas at some length, or be talked at by Mr. Lucas for some length. And it was clear to me, I mean, I wish I could do a big reveal. This is what George Lucas thinks about narrative art. But I suspect many of you already know what he thinks about narrative art, that his core belief and the way in which this museum is going to be articulated in demonstration of this belief is that storytelling is an innately human activity. It begins from the first signs, really, of the creative explosion of our species about 40,000 years ago in prehistoric caves. And as far as he's concerned, there is a sort of trajectory of, as it were, exploiting and refining the storytelling process that is going to take you to Hollywood and the marvels of modern cinematic experience. He has a huge collection of things that support this claim. and it's essentially based in Jungian psychology. It's a claim about the human psyche that we are a storytelling species, and that this is something that we share cross-culturally. So not only is it a very elementally sort of at the radical roots of who we are, it's a social mechanism that binds us together as a species, and that is transhistorical and transcontinental. Now, if you've done any studies in sort of history of folklore and such like, you'll be aware that even you don't have to be a Jungian psychologist to believe that stories that we consider to be traditional folk tales, those too can be demonstrated to have a kind of DNA that is very old. If you're interested, the tale of Little Red Riding Hood is thought to go back to at least the Bronze Age, 3,000 years ago. And more interestingly, for me than that, is the fact that if you do a kind of family tree of Little Red Riding Hood, you will find branches and roots going to Asia and into Africa and into the prehistoric Americas. So this is all, as it were, good news for the Lucas Museum of Narrative Art. But of course, it means that however big it is never going to be big enough really to encompass all of this. As you can see, the architect has made it very plain that if you set your story, let me get the wording of this right. I never had the courage to say to him that I'm not a big fan of Star Wars. If you set your story a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, so long as the protagonists are human, then the structures of those stories are likely to be similar to the structures of stories that humans have been telling themselves for thousands of years. Now, this is derived not directly from Jung, but mostly from a fellow called Joseph Campbell. Yeah, I'm sure many of you know his work. And it's not just George Lucas, his contemporaries and friends, Steven Spielberg and Francis Coppola, I think would be very congenial to anyone saying that, this belief in archetypal structures of stories is really the basis of good movie making. And it doesn't have to be reductive. You don't have to sort of stoop quite as to such basic levels as saying, there are only just, a certain number of basic plots to all stories or anything like that. But I think there are patterns to storytelling, and apart from being something that we have done as humans for a very long time across the face of the planet, I think it's also generally accepted by child psychologists that we start doing this almost as soon as we can pick up the wherewithal to make a mark. So if I show you something that, okay, I'm going to tell you it's by a small child of 3 to 4 years old, which not always a given with. I mean, you might have thought that was a nice piece of abstract expressionism. But if you were thinking that it was a piece of abstract expressionism, you would need correcting, because this is a picture with a title. It wants to tell a story of how the artist, if you can't see the title, wanted to tell us this is not just scribbles that are meaningless or random. This is the story of how someone had a snowball fight with their father whilst going downhill. And actually, if you let your eyes, we haven't got time for me to let you rest your eyes on it for a long time, but you will pick out, I think, some of those elements that young Sebastian wanted to. Now, defining a story is not always a simple thing to do. If you get lost in the thickets of narratological discourse, it's very polysyllabic and can be very complicated, and very intimidating, I think, as well, with some people saying that even a recipe for cooking is a story in its way. But I'm going to go with there are a lot of books that will offer to tell you about what constitutes a story, and I've lifted one from a fellow called Jonathan Gottschall, who reduces it very simply to character, predicament, extrication. If you've got those three elements, you have got a story. Now, I know some people following a recipe can get into a predicament and need extricating, but let's not go into this thing. But these pop armchair sort of psychological accounts of storytelling will make another claim on top of these sort of Campbellian, we've been doing this a long time and there are these archetypes of structure and elements. They will also say that we're hardwired. If we're faced with a series of images, one of the things that our brains want to do is say, is there a story behind these images? So if I just play this little game with you of cutting up a Peanuts cartoon, no words really apart from the title, but those of you who remember the series, it went on for a long time, syndicated all over the place. You remember there was a little boy called Linus, is that his name? And he has a comfort blanket, and it's his comfort blanket, and he doesn't like to be separated from it. So he's one character here. And of course, Snoopy the dog is the other one. And have you already got what the story is? Yeah, some of you, I think, have already noticed that there is one image here where, let's see it, yes, can you see there? Snoopy is looking down at the blanket, and well, you know where this is going because he basically diverts Linus from the blanket by doing a dance. And as Linus gets ecstatically involved in dancing, so he forgets the blanket and Snoopy gets it. So, there are worse predicaments to be in, but Snoopy has extricated himself from the predicament of not having a blanket to look in. I mean, I am going to use these terms throughout the session this afternoon. So stand by. Character, predicament, and extrication is what we want. Now, we need to look at some pottery, and I think one of the first things to say about pottery is that at first sight, it doesn't seem to be a very good medium for telling stories. There's a quote from an English writer who promise you, nobody ever reads anymore today. He's kind of the English equivalent to Emerson. And I'm not sure anybody reads Emerson these days. Richard Jefferies is his name. But there's a quote I used in a book long ago, and I can't resist quoting this again. Pottery. Feeble pottery, and this is Richard Jefferies, feeble pottery has ever borne the impress of man more vividly than marble. From these, and he's referring to things that are pots, vases, from these they quenched their thirst. Over these they laughed and joked and gossiped and sang old hunting songs until the rafters rang and the dogs under the table got up and barked. Well, you can probably tell why nobody reads them anymore. But I think the point that he makes about pottery being feeble is well made, because any of you who've done any archaeological work will know that what archaeologists often have to deal with is broken pottery, i.e. pottery that is no use really because it is broken. When it gets broken, it gets chucked away. Usually, although occasionally, if they really liked a pot, people in the past would try and mend it. Archaeologists love nothing better than something called a midden. Do you know what a midden is? It's just a dump. It's a rubbish dump, and you find a lot of pottery, and you can find it stratified. So as people are throwing away stuff, it sort of builds up into layers, and archaeologists get very excited about these layers. These are called stratified layers, and the reason they get excited is because you can end up with a whole lot of stuff that you spread it out on the table, and it looks like this. Okay, it was obviously no use to its ancient owners in this state. But what we like about it is that it has features that are called diagnostics. Bits of handle. People do PhDs on this. They devote themselves to rims and bases and other bits of pottery that form a typology and a taxonomy and indeed a chronology. So one of the principal resources of archaeologists with the Maya is precisely working with ceramics and coming up with diagrams that when you see them on a screen, I know I get the same effect. I look at them and I glaze over. And I'm not suggesting for a moment we try and engage, and nor am I qualified to do this, with how this diagram has been arrived at. But will you believe me when I say that pottery can give you this kind of diagram, this kind of chronology? It's not always found broken as well. That's the good news. And we're looking down on a fairly recent Maya excavation, which we're going to come back to a little later on in this afternoon session, where pottery is being found not only more or less intact, but in a context, i.e. it's a tomb, and as you see, I'm not going to give too much away about it now, but it's a tomb of someone who was once very important. And the same can be said of some of the pottery from northern Peru, the Moche pottery, that's also featured in the exhibition, where pottery is found with not only human remains, but also other objects that enable us to speculate to some extent on the status of the person who has taken it to the grave with them. And because it's something, as far as I'm aware, I mean, I have no plans to take any ceramics with me. I haven't given any instructions. I don't think it really crosses anyone's minds to do this today. So we're going to have to sort of get into the mindset of people who did want to be buried with things. And you may already be thinking, yeah, well, if they believe there's an afterlife in which they need to eat and drink, they need the utensils to do this. And I think you'd be right. And you'd be kind of, anticipating what archaeologists have spent huge amounts of words trying to say, in essence. But I think there's something more to it than that. And is that something more? Why have people been buried with pots that where they're decorated seem to have some kind of story to tell us? Why is this going on? And if we can all dissolve back into this wonderful afternoon that's outside, I think we'll have felt that it was worth sacrificing some of that afternoon to be here today. Now, some archaeologists, because of the inherent challenges of understanding images on pots from the past, some of them prefer really not to think about storytelling. I'm showing you an image, a lovely image of a lovely man who was one of the great, he was a pioneer really of applying a method of looking at ancient Greek pottery microscopically closely to see what it said about the people who made it, and really absorbing all the craft of the production of the sorts of vessels that are featured in the exhibition here, which To this day, it's difficult to forge one of these vases because they are so well made as pots and then so decorated with such finesse. And this chap, John Beazley, I think it's true to say he's sort of backed off any kind of reading of the stories on these vases, I imagine because he thought that it was simply too speculative, and he wasn't minded really to think of them as narrative objects. But we're going to try and do some of that this afternoon. And I've got a series of examples that introduce us to give us some sense of why, as an archaeologist, you might prefer just to talk about the style of this. Because it's not easy to say what is going on here. There are some aspects of it which I don't comprehend at all, and these are the hieroglyphic marks. Now, the Maya had a system of writing. Okay, it was hieroglyphic writing, and it's not easy to decode it. It's not quite as eloquent as you would like it to be. It's rather terse, and you may say, well, look, this is, it's a beaker, but that's still a very restrictive space on which to have a whole lot of script. And it's evident to anyone who's not an archaeologist, specialist in archaeology, but whoever's decorated this wants to give images, their due space. They want the pictures, not the writing, to do the work here. And the challenge for us is, what work are the pictures doing? So if this was a Peanuts cartoon that was cut up, how would we start to put it together? The only help I can give you is to have, that is, on one side, and on the other side, and what can we say about it? Well, this figure appears to be in some kind of throne. It's got broadly anthropomorphic figures, human-like figures. There's some object possibly in a basket here. And then there are the two figures who, what can we do with the body language here? Some would say that these figures are kneeling in an attitude of supplication. And if you've got a figure in a throne, we think of kings or some regal personage here. But you'll see the Museum of Fine Arts of Boston has got some more information. It can give us identities for these two. It says they're twins, and it's gone so far as to say they're the hero twins, Hunapu and Shbalanke. And it gives an identity to this character. A number of Maya deities have this name, but amongst the roles that Itzamna plays is also the role of ruling the underworld. How do we know this? Well, not on this vase, but there is a text, one of the very few Maya texts to survive the conquest process. It's supposed that there were professional, or at least if not professional, that might be the wrong word, full-time storytellers in, we know there were such figures in Aztec society, Maya society, people whose memory was probably amazingly good in terms of being able to recall details of a story without recourse to a text. But we know that they had things that we would call books, for want of a more precise term, but certainly leaves of bark with images on them that would enable them. So if you've forgotten one detail of a story, you've got it there as a kind of aid to your memory. And because one of these codices, the singular is codex, one of these codices did survive, was transcribed by a priest, a Spanish priest in the 16th century, and also translated. We do have a text, the Popol Vuh, which does tell us about orphaned twins within a sort of narrative, a very complex narrative of creation, according to Maya cosmology, who try to get their father back from the grave, effectively. So what we may find here is, although it's not actually in the text of Popol Vuh, here we're doing our speculation, the twins have come to beseech the Lord of the underworld, who's got their father as a set of skeletal remains. Please, can we have them back? Itzamna. As I say, there is no script of that. This is archaeology guessing at what that story could be. And it is, it's very similar to what the world's first documented hero Gilgamesh wants to do. Is there some way of overcoming our mortal fate? Bad news for Gilgamesh is that there isn't, but it's a part of many narratives about heroes, that they make some kind of descent into the next world, the underworld, and have a go. And we're going to see possibly the sequel to this episode, if it is an episode. Now, this one is, the hieroglyphs here are not easily read, but they do assist to some extent. But can we see that this is rolled out, and you may still think, gosh, I can make out the paddles on this paddle of ours, but I'm struggling really with anything else. Let me help you just a bit with a drawing. And will you agree with me that in terms of doing our peanuts exercise, can I see what might be happening here? We're going to have to start thinking quite literally out of the box here, outside of the box, because there's a restricted space. What story can be told on the space of a relatively small cylinder? But if we do look closely, we will find that there does seem to be one figure with a similar sort of headdress, an aspect, who's repeated once in the middle of the canoe, second time there, and a third time. And I'm saying that without knowing where you're supposed to start on this vase. I don't know what the rules were in terms of their kind of pictorial ordering of things, whether one starts from left to right or from top to bottom, so we don't know in which sequence this should go. But it does look like this figure is he's possibly in some kind of dancing posture. So rather like Snoopy and Linus, why are they dancing? Is he happy about something? If he's in a canoe, is he going on some sort of journey? Is it significant that the two paddlers look rather the same? You see, already you might be thinking, hey, you just told us about these hero twins. Could it be them paddling Dad back from the underworld? And then you see there's a slightly smaller version, but it's the same figure lying on the baseline here. And can you see he's being approached by a fish, and he's sort of underneath the canoe. So you may be thinking of the old British radio comedy called The Goons, which dates me, but that was one of their phrases. He's fallen into the water. And it may be that they have those figures, one of those figures is supposed to be in the water. And what does that mean? Well, you might have to look at the catalogue for this exhibition to get some more of the possibilities, the narrative possibilities for this. But let's move on to some moche examples. And again, you'll see that, this time it's a piece in the Met. Is this in the exhibition, Ruth? Can you remember? Yeah, good. You may look at this, the title of this, and think, Wrinkle Face. What kind of a name is that? not a very polite name to give a supernatural figure, which is what it is thought to be. Iguana, yeah, if something looks like an iguana, it looks like an iguana, but it's a sort of humanized iguana. Christopher Donnan, who's studied these things in much more depth than I have, he uses the word epic for evidence that comes entirely from pottery for these characters. So the complete lack of any text. There is no, Homer's Iliad or any such thing for these characters. There isn't even the Popol Vuh script that there is with the Maya. So we're sort of reaching into a kind of void of circumstantial textual evidence. And I think the natural feeling, I think, is that I don't know what to do with this. But would you agree with me that looking at these, you want them not to be mere decoration? And if I think about the ceramics that we have in my home, in my mother's house, or any home I can think of back in Britain, one wouldn't actually really look on plates for a story. I mean, there are sometimes sort of figures there, but we usually reckon they're just, part of a manufacturer's style. And we don't go looking for stories. But there's something about these that makes us reverse that and say, yeah, I think there is character and predicament going on here. And I want to know how they get out of this, because in some of them, you will see when you start looking closely that there are things going on here that need explanation. So can you see that our friend Wrinkleface, now you can see why he's called Wrinkleface, which is not a translation, it's just an invented name by Christopher Donnan, that this should be called Wrinkleface. It looks like a huge syringe, which it can't be. I think it's a spear that's jabbed into his arm. I mean, he never looks happy, Wrinkleface, but he's looking particularly annoyed, I think. That's a kind of, so we're reading the body language and trying to do something with that. And can you see that his shirt is ripped and that his stomach is distended? So he's suffering. He's in a predicament. And I think it's this that encourages scholars to say, he's been in a fight and his friend or companion, Iguana, is trying to assist him. And this must be an episode. This must be some kind of story that we want to have. We want to know more about it. That's our instinct with stories. And it's the sign of a good story that you stay with it because you want to find out what's going to happen. And a bad story loses you. With Greek material, there's a certain quantity of it that predates literacy, i.e. predates the Greeks being able to write their own language, which is, they took a script from another people, the Phoenicians, but they've been composing poetry without writing it down. So Homer, for example, does not write the Iliad or the Odyssey. He composes it. He has a musical, he has a lyre, a stringed instrument, and he can do thousands of lines from memory. What he can't do is write it down. There is a scholar, used to be at Chicago, Barry Powell, who thinks because when people heard Homer's stories, they thought they were such good stories, and because they didn't quite have his memory bank, that was the kind of catalyst. That's why they had to start writing, because of Homer. That's one of the theories. What we're looking at here doesn't have any writing on it. And as you can see, it's throwing down that challenge. You see something here. What kind of story do you think is going on? And some things are relatively easy. I think even though it's got a kind of bird's eye view. So instead of it being, banks of rowers on top of each other, I think we're looking down onto this. So it's got 2 decks of rowers on it, possibly even 3. And then there's 2 figures on the far left who look, well, moot point. How do you read this? Is that a seizure? You can see the figures are very geometrically outlined. Okay, at the risk of stereotyping, let's go with that's likely to be female and this is male. Is he dragging her onto the boat? Does he want to get onto the boat? There we are, more paddles for the steering of it. She's got something in her hand. Looks a bit like a tambourine, but are they dancing? Not really likely to be. We've got enough information to sort of get under our skin. You want to know what is going on here, but not enough really to resolve it. And then, for example, what is this strange object here? These are the rowers, but what's that doing in the ship? Because it's something you see on these vases, and it's got a name. I won't go into why it's called that Dipylon shield, but one of the theories about the shape of the shield is that when you see it in Greek art, it's saying that something happened long ago in the time of heroes. They don't use shields like that for rather good reasons, I think, in contemporary 8th century Greece. There are big holes in these shields, and they're not particularly doing what they're supposed to do. So in a way, they arouse suspicion. But people think they're shields all the same. Get to the front of the boat, and you find there's a sort of water bird, which some people might want to call a crane. And this is where you sort of start to bring in, is there anything we do know about, what a crane might signify here? Just before with the couple, if that is a seizure, could it be, I don't know how much your general knowledge of Greek mythology is going to help you here. Jason and Medea, Paris and Helen, Menelaus and Helen. If it's, or does she want to come and is he pushing her back? Yes, Ruth snorts and a lot hinges on how you read the body music going on here, and how far you're prepared to go in sort of seeking extra sort of straws that you can draw into this. And so, for example, you will find a classical text, an author, Plutarch, who's many hundreds of years after this vase was produced, but talking about the hero Theseus, who says that he and his followers did do a special dance that somehow, I must say I've never seen crane birds dancing, but whether it's a sort of one-footed hopping around or whatever it was called the crane. Is that the reason? So the artist just put that in there as if to say, and give us a clue as to that's Theseus and that's Ariadne, who wants to come with him, and he's saying, no, you stay behind. In which case, if this is Ariadne, that's a reminder that when she and Theseus were lovers, she gave Theseus a crown of phosphorescent coral to help him navigate his way through the labyrinth. And a great gift, but not enough to get her coming home with him on the boat. He abandons her on the island of Naxos. So as you see, we're really flailing around, just trying to bring in what we do know about Greek mythology, apply it to this. And there are some scholars who say, as you sort of unroll this vase, say, don't even try and do that. Just let it be a vase, a piece of pottery that once served to serve a purpose. It could have been for mixing wine and water, but another suggestion is that it was a sort of ritual washing basin used by a bride the night before her wedding. And Susan Langdon is the scholar who says, don't try and find any mythical story here. It's a metaphor for the bride and groom going on their journey together, becoming married. And so it's much more to do with the function of the vase taken to be a piece of prenuptial sort of dowry. for the ceremony. So I don't know what your sort of feelings are about this. Do you prefer a reading that says, don't find the story, look for meaning, but it doesn't have to be a narrative meaning here? I'm going to confess to being somewhat inclined to have it both ways. In a rather extraordinary British phrase, to have one's cake and eat it. I never quite figured out why, if you've got a piece of cake, you shouldn't eat it. But anyway, what it means is to have the best of both worlds. Do people still read James Thurber? I'm noting that some in this audience still read James Thurber and will remember his story of Walter Mitty, the character who basically daydreams through a fairly routine life. And his daydreams are all about being a hero, which he's got largely from books and movies and so on. So he has this kind, and I'm rather inclined that if this has a meaning for a married couple embarking on their voyage together, that's fine. But if you want it to be a couple who love each other, okay, Theseus and Ariadne is not going to be the best story for a married couple. That's true, but supposing it is Paris and Helen, or Menelaus and Helen. Again, Jason and Medea makes you think that's not going to end well, but some marriages don't. So, but do you see what I mean? I think there's this possibility that something can have a mythical resonance, even if that's not overt. I think what worries me about the explanation that these are more likely to be generic metaphorical significances is that when we do get writing, it wants to point us in a direction of a structured story or a structure of epic. Now, this is a vase. I was just going to show it very briefly. It's often used to illustrate Greek warfare in the 7th century, before the Common Era. So you see 2 units engaging and a piper figure there. But that's not the only thing happening on this vase. And down below, although, this is feeble pottery, someone has dropped this, but they, possibly the archaeologists broke it when they excavated. It was taken out of a tomb. But can you see that although, despite the breakage, here are what remains of 3 female figures walking in a sort of file, and there's a male figure and some kind of courier figure. We can tell this because he's holding a special kind of stick that signifies as much. And there is some writing here, very early Greek writing, and it wants to tell us the names of these people. So it's saying that this is not just any kind of gathering of 3 women. It is saying that this is 2 of these women are Athena and Aphrodite, which gives us the clue that this is likely to be, in fact, he is labeled here. He's given a different name, but it's equivalent to Paris. And this is the judgment of Paris. Who is the most beautiful of the 3 goddesses? And if you know that story, actually, you can go back to this and say, this is how wars start, with 3 women wanting the title of you are the most beautiful in the world, and only one of them can get it, and the prize she offers is to Paris, as you know, to take the most beautiful woman in the world, Helen. Bad news is she's already married to Menelaus, and that's basically the start of the epic that we know as the Iliad or the Trojan War, more widely. So I think the fact that writing, when it comes, wants to do the job of erasing our non-knowledge and taking us into a bit of certainty about all of this. And you've got in the exhibition very good example of what you can do even when there isn't the script of the epic for this. So on a drinking cup, we have the deeds. If that vase was Theseus leaving Ariadne behind, This is one that's produced almost 2 centuries later in Athens, and it gives you a very kind of compressed circle of events which are going to take us around the heroic apprenticeship. Now, do we all know what a hero is? I mean, it's one of those words that is kind of, it's been put into modern parlance. I can't count the number of times someone in Britain says, "You're a hero." Even if you just picked up a piece of litter from the street, you are a hero, which is rather banalizing the term. In Greek, anyway, it's a Greek word, heros, means something very specific. It means that you are effectively, you're above ordinary mortals, and you're hemitheos, you're halfway to becoming immortal, i.e. of divine status. So if you imagine the Greek sort of hierarchy is immortals, gods, mortals, and then bad news for all the animals, they're the bottom of it. But in between mortals and immortals, you can have the heroes. So they get a sort of feeling of what it's like to be a deity. And they kind of live, but they don't. They die, but they are venerated in the afterlife. We think that some, if not several poems must have been written about the hero Theseus, especially around the time that Athens, the city, was kind of defining itself, its territorial extent, and defining itself as a place with a specific mythological history, because Theseus is an early king of Athens, and he's given credit for uniting the territory of Attica around Athens. And what we see on this cup, inside and out, are a number of deeds going on. It's actually easier, I think, on the inside of the cup to pick out some of these. It works on a sort of binary system whereby Theseus is always the young, often mostly stripped figure, striding around the vase. And his opponents, this actually could be quite confusing if you don't know about the story of Theseus. His opponents tend always to look the same, and they're sort of, they're hairy, bearded, balding men who are always getting the worst of it. And the point about this is that they deserve it, because you can kind of plot a geographical course. This is where Theseus has his rather, I won't go into it, but it's not an easy boyhood. He has some problems persuading his mother that he should go out and fight a whole lot of monsters. Like any mother, she wants him not to. And like any teenage boy, he thinks mum is not right. So he goes ahead and does it anyway. And he makes his way to Athens in the course of a week. En route, he defeats various monsters. Some of them are in animal form. There's an enormous bull, and there's also an enormous wild boar that he has to dispatch. Up to now, it's his cousin Heracles who's had all the glory of defeating monsters. And it's almost as if this pot wants to give him his heroic pedigree. This is how he came to be the king of Athens. And it's how he got to be such a hero that eventually when he gets to Athens, he is going to save Athens from its then fate, which was to send a whole lot of young people to the island of Crete, to a king called Minos, who had this creature, the Minotaur, down in a labyrinth, which fed on the human tribute that he had exacted from the city of Athens. And it is Theseus who, in the center of the cup, is pulling out from a sort of palatial background, pulling out this half-human, half-bovine monster, the Minotaur. But all around the cup, you can sort of plot his various encounters with these nasty old men. I mean, they did really nasty things. One of them was called the Pine Bender because he liked to bend 2 pine trees and then tie his victims to the pine trees and then let them go. Yes, horrible. Another one got you to lie down on a bed, and he trimmed you to size. So if you were too short for the bed, he put you on the rack and pulled you, and if you were too long for the bed, he chopped bits of you off. That's the Procrustes, the bed of Procrustes. It's never said what he did if you were just the right size. I don't know. Maybe you got lucky if you were that. There was another fellow who would make you stop you as you walked past and say, "Wash my feet." And as you were washing his feet in a sort of foot bath, he would kick you. And this was on the edge of a sea cliff, so you would fall over into the sea, and there was a giant turtle waiting to eat you there. Here, this is just a really formidable wrestler, and it's very orthodox stuff. Theseus just gets him in an arm lock. Good man. Yeah, here he's got the foot bath. That's the foot bath that this old fellow used to get people to wash his feet in, and he's going to, well, it's feeble pottery, but you could still crack someone's head quite nicely with an old foot bath of it. And it's been noticed that as Theseus does this, he's actually mimicking the postures of two already established heroes, the tyrant slayers. These are the sort of like the founding figures of Athenian democracy. So although Theseus is a king, he's behaving like the founders of the Athenian democracy, the tyrant slayers, Harmodius and Aristogeiton. So it's a medley, and it's doing an awful lot on that space. You agree? And I think it's this ambition of pottery to go beyond its spatial tectonic limits that is so impressive, and what validates an exhibition like this, which, you know, some people might think, come on, pottery can't do that much, surely, can it? Especially if, like me, you think of the ceramics you have at home. And I just want to go with you through another epic example here, and how this is working despite the limitations, because there are a number of vases in the exhibition that feature a fellow called Ajax. Ruth, how am I doing for time? What? Fine, okay. Because Ajax, no, I mean, in Britain we have we've reduced him to a cleaning powder that you use, and it's again, it's depressing banality for a hero, and that's why, you know, he's strong, he works, and if you get into his story in the Iliad, you know, he's laconic, like many strong characters. He lets his actions do most of his speaking. In some versions of the epic, and Shakespeare picked up on this in his rendition of Ajax on the stage, he's not overloaded with brain cells, let's say. Yeah, he's a bit slow. But he would be the sort of person you would want to have on your side if violence breaks out. Yeah, he's really dependable, and that's his characterization in the Iliad. And what we find on this vase and a couple of the ones in the exhibition are images of him with for many people, you know, if they're asked to say, who is the great hero of the Trojan War and Homer's epic, the Iliad, they would say Achilles is the best of the Achaeans, the best of the heroes. What do the vases, some would say, this may not be a story, but this is not an episode of the Iliad as we have it. That, as you see, that it's got writing, and that's telling us, okay, you do have to read some of it left to right and back to front, but don't worry about that. You can cope. You're going to get Achilles there, and this is the Greek rendition, Iantos, Ajax of his name. It's going to tell you who made it, a potter and a painter called Ezekias of Athens, who was much beloved by that chap I showed you, Beasley. studying his Greek vases as a craftsman. I mean, just look at, if you see this in the Vatican, you get almost mesmerized by the amount of detail that's been etched onto this with such tender care. And what's he trying to show? Well, people have speculated possibly the two heroes, because they, Achilles has still got his helmet perched on the top of his head. They're still holding their spears. Should they be fighting? Well, if they should, they've neglected it. They've got involved in some kind of board game, and they're calling out their scores, 3, 4, here. Maybe this is just adding to the character. There's no particular predicament here, no particular extrication. But if you know the stories that are associated with these two, of course, the great thing that is, as it were, foreshadowed in the Iliad but not spelled out is that Achilles must die. He must die, really, because he has come back into battle on behalf of his boyfriend, Patroclus, knowing that basically, although he's going to avenge his beloved's death, he ultimately is fated to die. And it's Ajax who picks up his body when he's shot. Remember which bit of his body? His heel, Achilles' heel. That's where he can be shot as he is. So there you see Ajax carrying the body of Achilles. Now Achilles has a splendid set of armor, which has been taken from him in his death. Who should get that armor? If you know the story, almost immediately you say, the one who is always playing dice with him, the one who's picked up his body, the next strongest of the Greek heroes, Ajax should get his armor. That's not what happens, though. What happens is that another one of the heroes, who does have a lot of brain cells, who's called Polytropos or Polymetos, cunning, clever, smart, or as a recent translation has it, complicated. A complicated man called Odysseus says, let's have a vote on this. Now, Ajax are not very good at putting his case. It doesn't really know how to string more than about 3 words together. Odysseus is very eloquent. And what we get on one of these drinking cups is the Greek heroes they're pulling their knives out. They want to have a fight about this. Ajax and Odysseus. And in the battle between Ajax and Odysseus, you could probably predict Ajax will win. But on the other side of this cup, someone has intervened to say, let's vote for this in the way that the Athenians were voting at this time. You do it. You have anyone who wants the arms to go sorry, I should have shown you. There's the helmet and the bits and pieces of the armor of Achilles. Anyone who thinks it should go to Odysseus, vote on this side. And here's Odysseus. Hey, I have got it. Because he can see that he's got more pebbles on his size than here. And you can't really see the body language. It's a bit broken there. And it's basically Ajax doing this. It's just a little fragment. And sometimes all we need is a fragment to get this. And you see that 2 of them, Tydeus and Agamemnon, they're picking up these voting pebbles. It's almost as if Agamemnon, this great warrior, is saying, look what we do these days. We've put away our swords. Instead of fighting, we're just going to pop down a little vote. And it's all done in this very democratic way. But Ajax can't take it. And this is probably, I think, the most poignant epic vase I can think of Ajax, alone on the beach. How do I know that? How do I know it's a beach? It's not just because of the palm tree. It's because we do have a text. We have a whole play called Ajax, by one of the great Greek tragic writers, Sophocles, which talks us through the moral issues of this. The moral issue here being that after what happens is that Ajax has a bit of a breakdown, very violent breakdown. He slaughters a lot of animals thinking they are his fellow Greek commanders, having lost the vote. When he comes to his senses, he's mortified and decides that the only way he can really go now is to end his own life. And here, Ezekias, the same one who showed him playing a game of dice with Achilles, has him entirely on his own, completely isolated here, planting his sword into, very carefully, his fingers. He's got beautiful long fingers, pushing down to make sure it's going to stay there Ironically, a sword was given to him by one of his enemies, Hector. Just look at the settle. There's his helmet. It's empty, but the eye line is just, that's the only witness he's got, the empty helmet. He's totally alone here. No counseling, no nothing, no support for Ajax. And in the exhibition, you see, I think the irony of the the shield that was meant to frighten everyone is looking out. And we're just focusing now. And the palm tree is kind of bending over as if it's like a sort of pathetic fallacy in sympathy with poor old Ajax. And then, on one side of the vase that's in the exhibition, you have that contrast, the votes and the fight, or rather the fight that was averted by voting, and then you have the consequence. So as you drain your wine, this is what you see. And, if you've been thinking, that's called a drinking cup. We know that wine was characteristically dark. So this is what you see when you've got to the bottom of your cup. And you may be thinking, drinking, it's supposed to be a party. People are supposed to be having a good time. And what do they get? An image that is upsetting. And I think if you take it seriously as a story, it is a very disturbing image to have. So what would justify it being on a ceramic that has this use? And we know within the Greek world that it's there is an institution that we can relate this to. Well, let's just look back, actually, because, one of the things that this exhibition is trying to do is a comparative exercise of three, in the case distinction between ancient Greece and what's happening in Mesoamerica and the Moche, they would seem to be worlds apart. And in terms, I think, of the characterization, there's fundamental difference between a culture that is animistic, that believes that spirits can inhabit the animal world. So you could have an iguana that has basically a human spirit within it. Whereas in the Greek world, it is analogic, i.e. the heroes are the gods basically look like humans, and heroes can assimilate to gods on that kind of analog basis. But let's just think about what, in a sense, they've got in common in terms of agency. What work are these images doing? It's the most conspicuous thing about this is it's got a hole that has been deliberately drilled into the middle of it, and you can see it if you flip it over. This is not a modern addition to it. And one of the archaeologists, Andrew Feingold, has called these vital voids or kill holes, because as he points out, a bowl is not really much use as a bowl if it's got a hole in it. Not if you're wanting to drink your soup out of it. So what is it doing? And of course, in a sense of the logic of trying to work out what is happening in narrative terms here, well, let's see what we can do with this one. You can see a figure with a sort of Quetzal headdress. We may have seen him before. I think we probably have. Yet again, two similar figures either side. One of them's got this jug in it, and you'll have to accept, as I have to accept, the expert saying that these hieroglyphs are going to tell you that's water being poured out of there. This, I think, is a bit more difficult. It's sort of like a tortoise or a turtle carapace, but it's been split, and this figure is coming out of it. Now, if you go with Popol Vuh and the what textual information we have about this, it's hypothesized that this is really this then would be the sequel, that the two boys, Hunahpu and Xbalanque, have curried favor with Itzamna. They have got their father reassembled. Those dry bones have been put back together, and this is him coming out. So the underworld, if you like, is like the carapace of a of a turtle or a tortoise. It's split open, and out he comes. And if you're thinking, what is this doing? Well, it's inscribed to someone who is thought to be in a position of power, a royal figure. If it's made to be a story with a kind of cosmic seasonal meaning, it would be the maize god. And by some accounts, Hunapu is a manifestation of the maize god, i.e. the boy's father. They're pouring water as a maize farmer will pour water to germinate a seed. And so it has this kind of rebirth and agricultural sort of logic to it. And of course, this takes it down to very elemental narrative reasons that, maize is the staple. And this story gives you the wonderful imaginative justification of that with a story. Now, with the Greeks, we know that they practice this thing called symposium. This literally means drinking together. And you see them. These are the cups. These are the same sort of cups you'll see in the exhibition here. Look at this. Note that. That's the lyre. So these are parties where you don't just make music, but you tell stories. And they probably played a game where one person would start the story off, and you go around the table and others pitch in what they know about it, what they want to elaborate about it. But it's a tomb, so it's again got this context of being associated with funerary practice. And I'm putting up these images not to suggest there's any kind of direct influence going from one part of the world to another, but just on a superficial level, how this is the tomb that we saw the archaeologists digging inside it and locating human remains and pottery, intact, more or less intact pottery. And that's the structure outside of it, relatively recently discovered, as you see, and now tidied up into this. Not a lot is known about its occupant, frustratingly, but I think we're getting a sense of why it is these vases need to tell big stories. They're for big people, or people who think they have a big status. They're making big claims to have direct influence with the immortals, or even to be descended from the immortals. And in fact, if you go into the Greek record, you'll know that, many heroes, Heracles being the most obvious one, have got divine ancestry. Aeneas, etc., could go on. Pure coincidence, I think, that this Mayan tomb looks rather like some of the tombs that you find across in Italy, the Etruscans, and it was in a tomb like this that one of the most notorious Greek vases with an epic theme was found in the 1970s. If you know the story about this, there is a modern archaeological story about it's the first ancient Greek vase to fetch $1 million on the art market. But as you may be aware, there was a sort of prosecution by the Italians, which has seen it move back. If they ever invite me back here, I could give you a whole talk about this. And I mustn't. I know I'm going to switch myself off very soon. But I put it up there to remind us all of the size of the themes that a pot can take on. I mean, this is relatively a big vase, but it's still a vase. It was found in many, many pieces and glued together, so it had been broken. And in fact, if you look closely, there is actually traces of it being mended in antiquity. Someone dropped this in the past, and they didn't want to throw it away as rubbish. It's too good for that, so they did put it back together. Probably it wasn't any use anymore as a bowl for mixing wine and water in, but the theme was epic. It was a hero going to his virtual apotheosis. I mean, he doesn't technically become a god, but he gets worshipped forever after because he comported himself like an epic hero. His name was Sarpedon, and there's a whole, I did a whole monograph about this one vase, and my mother still cannot believe one vase, a whole book on just one vase. But that's how big it would take. It would take another session to go through that. And I think if you've got someone else coming to talk about this exhibition, they could probably do, a whole session on what is happening on these complex examples of pottery from the Mesoamerican and Moche world. And I think the upshot of this, the take-home message of it all, is that in their way, in the structures that they, in the kind of visual cues they want to give us about thinking about. Sorry, this is going to sound a bit corny, and I get fed up with people using the metaphor of going on a journey, and we're all going on a journey, and it's sort of, some would say it's gone too far, this sort of reduction of everyone having to be heroic and face their fears and something. What was Joseph Campbell's phrase? The hero with 1,000 faces. But I think we've seen some of those faces. There are more, I think, to feast our eyes on in the show itself. And I think, I hope that although painted pottery can't match it's panoramic, it's immersive, it's multi-sensorial, sensory medium. It's going to be very hard to match the mode of cinema. But I hope I might have persuaded you that George Lucas is not off, he's not far from the point in thinking that the roots of this storytelling power lie in places that we may not think of finding them, like pieces of pottery from the ancient world. So thank you all for giving up your time and being here. I'm indebted to Katie and her team and Ruth for hosting me. And I think we're all indebted to the Laszlo family for sharing some of their family values and enabling this event possible. Thank you very much.